Welcome to the Coffee Break Podcast, where our mission is to share business ideas, practices, and strategies while we enjoy our coffee. Today, we are again remote recording here in San Antonio, Texas, at the Medeco Security Center Conference as part of the whole Assa Abloy network. And today, our guest is an RV expert, travel connoisseur, and also a former group president for Assa Abloy. We're privileged to have Scott Baker on the podcast today, and we'll be chatting with him in just a moment.
We got so much to say. We got a podcast to make. We're sipping on lattes, and it's time for a coffee break. It's time for a coffee break. Oh yeah.
All right, welcome back. And Scott, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know
it's not so busy anymore, Chad, but thank you very much for having me. At some point, as you get close to retirement like I am, you just want to be wanted, right?
There you go. Yesterday, we, as part of this whole conference, we were standing in a trade show. You walked in the door. I wasn't even expecting you to be here. You walked in the door, we started chatting, and next thing you know, here we are sitting in our temporary podcast studio. So thank you for doing that. As part of our podcast in season 2, we have a new segment that we introduced. It's called rapid fire questions. So we have 5 rapid fire, just random questions to throw at you first thing that comes to mind.
Okay, surprise me.
All right, here we go. Question number 1. What's the craziest dare that you've ever taken?
To quit a stable business and start a startup company with no money.
Okay, that's a pretty big dare.
That was a pretty big dare. As a matter of fact, that when they wanted me to do it with them, I said, absolutely no chance. And they kind of said, I dare you. Take a chance.
Take a chance on us. Question number 2. What is one weird fact that you happen to know?
I am a font of useless information.
Okay.
So if you want to know anything about history or old movies or anything that took place years ago, I'm your man.
Just anything useless.
Oh gosh, nothing comes to mind right now.
Nothing specific. Just
no,
a
but
lot of things.
if a subject comes up, then I'll roll into it.
All right. Number 3. Who is your celebrity lookalike?
Michael Eisner. There's no question. Michael Eisner was the chairman and CEO of Disney for a very long time.
Yeah.
And people used to actually mistake me for him, even though I'm about 15 or 20 years younger than him.
Huh. I can see that. That's fun. All right. Number 4. If you could eliminate one food so no one would ever have to eat it ever again, what would it be? Broccoli.
It's not even close.
Very ironic.
Just the smell of it drives me nuts.
Yeah. I would have said beets.
I've never cooked beets, so I couldn't tell you. I've had them before.
I like broccoli. Now the smell of broccoli post cooking, most definitely. But beets, just the taste of it. All right. Last question on that is how much does a polar bear weigh?
About 2.25 tons, about 4,500 pounds.
Really? Is that an actual useless fact?
That's a total guess. Absolutely random guess. Actually, thinking about it, probably even more than that.
Really?
Do you know how much a polar bear weighs?
I have no idea.
Oh, okay. Well, that's 4,500 pounds. It's 4,500 pounds, and that's certain.
Just say it with confidence.
Absolutely. Yep.
So yesterday during our conversation, the topic of company culture came up, and so I want to really dive into that. That's going to be a big chunk of what we're going to be talking about today. And I think it's such a buzzword in our industry right now, but if you really dive back, and I think what this conversation will unfold is that maybe that's what it's been labeled as here in recent, but it's been something that strong organizations have understood for a long period of time.
Well, I think culture is the most important thing for any business or any enterprise at all. Whether even not just for big companies, but even if it's a one-person startup company, you have to have a culture that's fundamental to your belief. I heard this saying once that I've stolen many times: strategy wins the year, culture wins the decade.
Yeah.
And I'm a true believer in that. And as I developed in my career from a very focused technical person who used their strengths as an aggressive, outgoing person with strong technical skills, to build up a career,
Yeah.
I started shifting more and more away from that day-to-day technical aspect to focus on what I thought was the most important aspects of culture for developing a good company.
So let's give a little bit of context for those of the folks that are watching or listening that don't know who Scott Baker is. So you to kind of backtrack a little bit, we were just chatting about it before we started recording. Tell us about the early days. You were telling us that you had a little stint at a radio station.
Well, I'll give the short version of my career if I can. I graduated from USC in 1977
All right.
with a degree in broadcast journalism,
Okay.
which was basically focused on radio.
Sure.
And I worked in the radio industry for 2 years, or just under 2 years, doing a variety of things, mostly top 40, mostly doing commercials. And then I had issues with that, and I moved back to LA from Arizona in 1979, worked for a company named Avery Sweeping Floors just because I needed to work, and worked my way up there into an engineering position and then an applications engineer. And there I met two guys named Bob Cook and Vince Fraliciardi, both working at Avery when I was there. And Bob was then approached by someone with money about starting this company called Securitron because they had an idea. It was not my idea. I was approached about joining them in the startup. They were both about 10 years older than me, so I was somewhat younger. I was 28 at the time.
Sure.
And we started Securitron in 1984.
Yep.
And then we continued.
Is that the Dare that you were talking about?
That was the Dare.
All right.
That was the Dare, yep. And then we moved the company from L.A. to Reno in 1993, sold it to Assa Abloy in 1998. Bob Cook was president of the company. I was VP of sales at the time.
Okay.
Bob left the company to go run Medeco after Assa Abloy bought Securitron and Medeco within a month of each other in 1998.
Right.
Bob left to go run Medeco.
Interesting.
Because they had changed the Medeco leadership, and I was made president of Securitron.
Okay.
And there were not enough companies as part of Assa Abloy in 1998 to have subgroups like they have now.
Yeah.
But then as we started acquiring companies, the guy who was in charge of Assa Abloy at the time, a guy named Klaus Thelin, liked what I was doing with Securitron and kept on adding companies to my responsibility.
Gotcha.
Which eventually got to about 11 companies total. Although when I left my job 2 weeks ago, it was down to 8 because we had moved companies out or changed responsibilities. So I stayed in that role as president of a subgroup of a group at Assa Abloy from 2001. I was president of Securitron until 2001, and then a group president until 2002, actually, until 2 weeks ago.
So I think this is going to play into some of the conversation of culture that we're going to get to. What does a day in the life of a president of 11 companies look like?
That's a good question. The last couple of years, it has been pretty a work down mode. But before that, there were, you have to kind of be involved in every aspect of the business. So my personal day, I would start my day by going very early in the morning by going through all the emails that I might have built up from the day before. But then I would put my laptop closed, I would not take my phone, and I would wander the building and I would chat with people about what was going on in their part of the world, and I would focus on trying to develop that culture that I was talking about before. I would explain to them what I thought was most important, and they would tell me what they were having struggles with. It was my job to remove roadblocks more than do their job. They were doing their job. They understood their job better than me, but they would tell me what their roadblocks were.
Yeah.
And so we would get to know each other that way. And then I'd go back and I'd sit on the phone with customers.
Sure.
And then I spent a lot of my time, almost half my work days on the road, visiting customers or going to see factories. I always believed that the best education you can get is living in what your customers have to live with.
So it's interesting. I think in any career path, and you just described it, I believe, and maybe you can talk on this a little bit, you build up kind of a reputation over time, and through that process, it's almost like this big curve where you get at the top of that curve, you're continually, and maybe the position of the curve would be different, but at a point you have built up so many tasks that you're doing, right? You emails and phone calls, and you get so bogged down into the task that you lose connectivity to what it is that the organization is doing.
The hardest lesson I had to learn as my responsibilities increased was the lesson of delegation, because you get to a certain point because you can be pretty good at things, right? Typically, you're promoted because you're successful. You can be pretty good at things, and it's very hard to accept that other people can be good at them as well. And so you tend to hold those things to yourself. And the hardest part for me was delegating things I thought I was better at than people who I thought weren't as good as me. But I found out that, first of all, you're not as good at something as someone else if you're not doing it at all. You're so busy that you're never getting to it.
Barely touching it because your hands are on
secondly,
everything.
you're delegating it to someone who's doing it exclusively.
Yeah.
And they might be smarter than you.
Yeah.
Not just about their subject, they might be smarter than you intellectually in general.
Sure.
And you find out that delegating is actually, if you spend enough time giving them your philosophy and helping them understand what your goals are,
Yeah.
then they're actually going to do that better than you would have done it anyway.
It's interesting, Scott. I have found over the last, I don't know the amount of time, maybe the last 2 years, the more time, as you just said, that my laptop is shut and the more time that I'm interacting with our team, I have a more productive day. Where before I felt like my productivity was measured based off of the amount of output that I was doing on, administratively. And so it's very interesting. You talk to people, and one of the books that I read, it was like, walking around asking, what are you working on and what can I do to help? Understanding what that process is, what those roadblocks are, what those barriers are, and understanding how you can impact them is a huge leadership aspect that I think is very minimized.
I couldn't agree more. As a matter of fact, you said something about being well-known in the industry, and I got to the point of being well-known in the industry, but it was never from doing emails. It was always from talking to people. It was always from going out in the field. It was going to trade shows.
Yeah.
It was going to educational events and learning stuff yourself. And then when I would call on customers, I would try and bring value to the customer.
Yeah.
And when you bring value to that customer, they remember you.
Yeah.
Right? And they mention you to somebody else and somebody else and somebody else, and then that person calls you. It is not sitting at your computer. I had a coworker who I greatly admired once for his intellect, working for a different company, actually, was a peer. And he prided himself that every day he answered every email in depth that he received all day. And I've never been able to do that.
Yeah.
Just never had that skill. But I started, and I used to be jealous of it, and I started to realize, except for, and I won't name him, even though he's retired now, except for I realized that he was not well known in the industry. He did not have a reputation because he was so busy doing emails that only the people who worked directly for him really knew what value he brought.
Interesting. I think that kind of plays on some different strengths through your leadership capacity, and part of it is interacting. So I mean, and like you just said, that is a big learning experience. Talking and understanding what's going on, and you get so much value out of doing that. So when you're talking about culture, when you're talking about the environment of the organization, by definition for the culture. How you walk into a place, so you're managing 11 companies. How do you understand, what are some key
Never
things?
11 at once, just to be clear. It's been a total of 11, but
Overtime,
different
okay.
companies over time.
So when you walk into those different organizations, what is the process of understanding what the current culture is? Like, what are some tips and kind of concepts that people could take away and go, okay, let me start kind of looking through my organization?
Well, first you have to establish in your own head what your core values are. And so it's important to understand what you want your culture to be. Understanding a culture in a company you walk into is impossible. You can't walk into a company you're newly responsible for and understand that culture, because culture is much broader and deeper than that. It's about the way people live. You can look and see what's written on a chalkboard someplace or posters on the wall, and you know what someone says their culture wants to be.
Sure.
You can see that pretty quickly, or you can ask management, what's the culture around here? And they'll tell you, but that's not necessarily accurate.
Yeah.
Because culture becomes what everybody lives. Culture is steered by the management team, but it's determined by the regular employees, and your customers tell you what culture your culture you have. You don't actually get to decide what it is, because if you say that the most important thing to us is good cash flow, that our accounts receivable are always going to be on top of things, but the people who work for you or your customers don't abide by that, that's not your culture.
Sure.
You just want it to be your culture.
Yeah.
So there's a big difference. So I think the only way to know what a culture is at a company is by spending a lot of time with it.
So spending a lot of time getting involved and just interacting with people, asking questions.
I've always been accused in a negative way of having too many meetings, and you'll get a lot of people who talk about, oh my goodness, meetings just are a waste of time, we're not doing anything. But how can you understand what people are thinking about if you're not talking to them?
Yeah.
And then you have to talk to them at some level collectively, right?
Sure.
And collectively it has to be back and forth. It can't just be one person talking to everyone. So that means patience is required. these meetings eat up a lot of time.
Yeah.
They chew up people's time. That's absolutely right. But when you come out of them with everybody on the same page, and hopefully everyone feeling like their opinion was given and heard.
Yeah.
And so that's so people have always said about me that I waste too much time in meetings and stuff like that. I don't apologize for it at all, because I think it's an important part of setting that culture.
That culture build. So when you assess what the culture is, and then you get to the point of going, okay, now we need to change things. What does that look like?
Well, change things is a detail on a strategy. It's not a culture. Culture should never change. There's fundamental core values that have nothing to do with your day-to-day business strategy, and that culture should never change. It can be modified slightly, but there's certain things that mean something to other people. Like I always say, the heart of our culture in my groups is a true, driven, competitive desire to beat the heck out of everybody else. I mean, even our sister companies.
Yeah.
I can tell you, we sit in my companies, we sit in there and we drive and we say, Sergeant outperformed us last month. That is unacceptable. Even though I've worked with Sergeant and helped sell Sergeant for a long time, my best buddies are over there.
Yeah. Friendly competitiveness.
You have to be competitive. I always say that I was more competitive with my brother than any enemy I had, even though I love my brother deeply. When we played basketball one-on-one, man, I was just elbow in the throat if I had to. I was going to win, and he felt the same way. So at the heart of that culture, that competitiveness, well, that's not a cultural aspect that ever changes.
Yeah.
But I always say culture, it has to be driven competitiveness in a non-threatening environment.
Okay.
And the reason why I say that is I hate bullies.
Yeah.
I've never been able to accept bullies, and anybody who bullies at our company, there are basic rules at our company, which are part of the culture. There's no yelling, there's no intimidating, there's no browbeating. One employee, it's not just about a manager yelling at a staff member. One employee, and we've lost more people because they violated that aspect of our culture. Mm-hmm. Now, that's not true at a lot of really successful companies.
Yeah.
A lot of really successful companies are led by bullies.
Yeah.
That's just a personal thing for me, so I try and live that. And because I can be an overwhelming personality in the first place, it's really important to me that I not be a bully.
Yeah.
That I not push people around, and consequently no one should be. No one has ever been yelled at by me. No one has ever been sworn at or intimidated that way or threatened with their job. So you have to have that uber competitiveness in a non-threatening environment. It's a hard balance to have, but you have to also have that accompanied by personal responsibility and accountability. People have to be held accountable.
Sure.
So if you're going to have a super competitive environment, non-threatening, that means they have to know at the end of the day, going into there, without getting yelled at, they may lose their job if they aren't able to hold up to those standards.
So you're talking about core values, all right? Having an outline of what you believe in, what's important. When the core values don't align with the culture of the organization, how does that?
Well, the core values are the culture of the organization, or you want them to be.
Okay.
So if we'll set up core values, we'll talk about competitiveness. We'll talk about customer number one. Mm-hmm. Those are the basic core values. And, we'll add core values, things like sustainability, things like being a good, an employer of choice as well as a vendor of choice.
Yeah.
I mean, those are the core aspects of your culture, but those are all driven from the basic same aspects. And those never have to change. Those aren't strategy.
Yeah.
Strategy is a detail that's a sub-part of your culture, and that does change every year.
So identifying all those things, understanding what they are, and then what is the process of communicating out what that is, so that new folks that are coming into the organization, or maybe folks that have kind of moved away from it a little bit, are drawn back into the core values and the culture of the organization.
It's talk. It's working with your managers. It's reminding them every day. I've been doing this for 30-something years. I've been president of a company for almost 20 years now. And during that time, I never stopped reinforcing what I thought were the most important rules. I used to stand in front of every employee that we hired, and it got out of control. It was too many people.
Sure.
I couldn't do it. And I used to say there's 3 rules for success working for us. That's show up on time. I'm obsessed with the idea of being on time, and that's not a culture. Try hard when you're here and get along with your coworkers. And I said, if you always obey those 3 rules, you will be protected in a job as long as the economy allows me to afford that.
Yeah.
You can never promise there'll ever be a layoff, although I've never had to do one.
Yeah.
You can never promise anything like that to people. But I always had those 3 rules.
Yeah.
You have to be on time. And most people self-elect not to work for you anymore.
Yeah.
They didn't show up on time, or they didn't try when they were there.
Yeah.
You don't have to be the most talented person around. If I can see you're giving effort, we'll find something that fits you.
Yeah.
And we'd always try and mold the job to that person.
Yeah.
But if a person's trying hard, what more? And they're on time and they're trying hard and they're not yelling and screaming at their coworkers, you don't have to like your coworker. You're not going to.
Yeah.
Heck, I don't always like all the members of my own family. They certainly don't like me. But you do have to figure out how to get along with them.
So we've kind of always aligned with I like groups of 3.
Yes, so do I.
Show up on time, have a positive attitude, and always give 100% of everything that you do. So it's very similar.
Almost the same rules.
Yeah, very interesting.
It's funny, you do groups of 3. I have this thing that people can only remember 3 things at once. So I always say I only have 3 rules, and the joke around the company is I have about 30 versions of 3 rules.
Of 3 rules. I don't know anything about that. That's sounds very familiar. So yeah, you have your core values. You're sharing them on a regular basis, and sharing them in how is it? How do you do that? Is it just that you're going through the list of them, or how are you communicating what is important and what those?
Well, when you'll sit in meetings, like I said, we have lots of meetings. We'll have product planning, product development planning meetings where we'll work on the roadmap for the product planning, or we'll have sales meetings, or we'll have operational meetings. In the meetings I sit at, there'll be subjects that come up that allow you to reinforce that things you think are most important in that subject. Like there'll be talk about our inability to ship something on time and what's going on, and then I can use that opportunity to say, we don't care what it costs to get the product in here. We care about losing a customer and keeping a customer.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't matter what it costs to bring product by air freight from China if we have to, or something like that, because the cost of replacing that customer is much larger. And so I'll get to say that in a meeting as a subject comes up, and I'll remind everyone all the time what our most important aspects are.
Tie that back to the value.
But I'm also a big believer in open communication. So every month at my companies, where there's always been an employee communication meeting, it's had a variety of different names. People call it different things, but you can call it an employee communication meeting. And in that, everyone's gathered in a single room. We'll have 250, 300 people in a room sometimes, and they're told exactly what we did last month. Sales, profits, cash flow, how we're doing on our metrics for their bonuses. I'll generally talk about the state of the economy, how we stand compared to our other companies, and then I'll talk about any other impactful business situations. And you do it every month. And whether I'm there or not, that meeting continues.
Yeah.
So you have to set a regular schedule, and you have to live with it. If you don't do it, unless it's convenient, you're just not going to do it.
And that, am I too far stretching in saying that is part of a company culture?
It is. It is part of it. Well, the subparts of the culture are far more than the simple rules I said.
Yeah, sure.
About competitiveness and accountability and non-threatening environment.
Because when you go into an organization and people are just doing and they don't know what it is that they're doing or how it impacts it on a larger scale, then it just becomes monotonous. So taking that time on a monthly basis to say, all right, everybody, this is what's going on. This is what we accomplished. This is what we didn't accomplish. And this is how it affects everything else, is something that keeps everybody and I hate this saying, but keeps everybody on the same page. But it gets everybody in alignment with the direction that you want to go.
It does. It gets everybody in alignment quite well. Now, there are people who don't like it. I'm sure there are people who don't want to come. You make them all come anyway. But and everybody who comes, 90% of the employees who work at a large company like this one are assuming that the people in management have no idea. They don't understand what's going on. There's corners of the company where stuff's happening and they don't have any idea. And there's some truth to that. There's possible to know everything that's going on, but they still really need to feel like management is engaged, and management is aware of what's going on outside the building.
Yes.
And so my focus would always be at these companies of talking about what's going on outside the building, not inside the building. Because if I talked about what was happening inside the building, these people feel they know it better than I do already. They want to know I know my numbers.
Sure. What's an example of that, knowing what's going on outside of the company versus inside?
I would talk about changes at customers. Ownership, economic things, trade shows that were coming up, products that we featured, awards that were won in these competitive environments, what customers would say to me as I was visiting, especially positive things. These meetings were always intended to be positive in nature. So every now and then you have to bring up a downer. But mostly you'd sit up there and say, hey, listen, I was seeing Chad at Loc-Doc, and he won the award for the most sales of this electromechanical specialty group and high security group last year for the highest growth. And he said to me, man, you guys are really doing a great job shipping this product. So I thank you all for doing that, because those are the people who deliver that. So I always want to take what I hear in the field and translate it back to the and that's what they're most interested in, because that part they really can't see.
Yeah. That's very interesting. I think that's very insightful. So I'm trying to translate that down to service industry or small business. So like for us, our sales team is out dealing with a customer, and the customer says, hey, really, really impressed by the way that your team has answered the phone, responded to our emails, and gotten a technician out on site. And your tech that came out here was amazingly informative, friendly, and got the job finished in a timely manner. We were super impressed. And you come back to that team meeting and say, hey, this is what happened. This is what the customer said. And this is, this kind of applies back to everything that we've been working on.
And I think that's really important that you say that, because in a really competitive environment, you're always trying to do better than you did last period, no matter how well you did last period. Yeah. And that makes sometimes it feel like there's no reward to that. So you have to make sure you take the time to celebrate what successes you have. But every now and then you have to say, listen, we lost a big job to a competitor because they were able to deliver a feature we couldn't deliver. Let's talk about how we can do that next time and get better.
I think you just said something interesting there that we have kind of dialed into a lot, is that oftentimes, especially when we're always focused on improvements, that you're always looking ahead and always talking about what you're not meeting yet, or where you haven't arrived yet. And it's, what you just said was taking time to recognize your accomplishments. So the analogy that I've always kind of aligned with is you're kind of in this middle ground where you still have a gap between where you're at and where you want to be, but you have to stop and recognize the gap of where you are versus where you were. And that's really that recognition of development and growth. Take time to honor that and appreciate that, and not always, you take a break from the gap of where you are versus where you want to be.
Well, I used to say, the problem with business is you never get to cross the goal line. You don't have a Super Bowl. You don't celebrate the victory with a parade, right?
Yeah.
Until you get to be in my position and you're getting ready to retire. But I've been doing this. I've been doing this at Securitron since 1984. With Assa Abloy since 1998, and I've had 1 year in that 35 years, 34 plus years of not growing, and that was 2009, 2008 to 2009. 2009 was a bloodbath for everybody, us included. We dropped 17% that year, but every other year was growth, and that means the next year had to be more.
Yeah,
and the pressure of that, frankly, wore down on me as well. It wasn't just.
Sure.
I mean, one of the reasons I told people I'm having to step away is just that. Unrelenting, nonstop, no matter how good you did, no matter how good everyone tells you the company's doing, you have to do it again.
You got to do it again.
Because you're only good as you did this month.
Yeah, one of the presentations even this morning is like 10% growth over year, and it's like, well, that's what you're going to do this year too, And I can say that I had one of our team members ask me one time. He's like, "So when is enough enough? Like when are you going to stop pushing for growth?" I was like, I don't even know how to. I don't know how to answer that question.
So someone said to me when someone asked me the same question once. It says, when is enough? When are you guys big enough? And I go, I don't know. I'll let you know when I get there, though. But I haven't found it yet. No matter how much we do, I want to do more.
So what if you were to sit back and look at your career and your all of the things that you've been able to impact, or the things that you've experienced through the different companies, what is something, maybe a big takeaway, maybe a big lesson that you've learned that you would say, hey, other business leaders and managers and owners or whatever that are out there, this is one thing. If you can pay attention to this one thing, it'll impact a lot of others.
Well, your culture needs to be based around your personality. But I'll say the thing for me that I felt turned the corner is I could drag a certain size company along with whatever I did just on sheer force of will. But you can't do that at some point. At some point, you need help. And I would say trust is the most important lesson I learned. Is once I started really trusting, it's not just delegating to them.
Yeah.
It's trusting them with it. It's trusting them so much to the point that you're not checking what they're doing every day, that you're not even interested in what they're doing every day. You're not even interested in how they do it. You do care about the results.
Yeah.
You do care that they're doing it in general your way. But when you get that trust, that is the most important development I think you can take if you want to expand beyond what you personally can do.
That's powerful. I mean, that's a powerful statement, because when you're talking about any business and delegation, everybody talks about delegation, but if you're delegating and then micromanaging the delegation,
Right.
then your progress is still stagnant.
There's a dark side to the trust thing, though, and that is not everybody is trustworthy. And what you have to do, which was not a strong point for me, what you have to do, and this is what I lecture everybody about who's coming up or replacing me, or I talk to Stacy all the time, and I talk constantly about trust, finding people you can trust and trusting them and giving them the responsibility, but you have to hold them accountable.
Yeah.
And if you find you can't trust them anymore, you can't work with them and try and change them. You have to let them go.
Yeah.
And find someone in there you can trust. Because if you find that you can't trust them anymore and you say, I'm going to talk them into working with me again, you're never going to get to that trust point again.
So, and not to stir up a whole nother conversation, but when you talk about trust, when it relates back to core values, if you have what I think I've seen in our organization, and maybe you can agree or disagree, if you have a good defined set of core values and you understand what that is, if you're not trusting someone, it typically points back to failure to meet those values or alignment with those values, right? And then, but oftentimes we wait too long, or we hold on to that person too long because we think we can fix them, or we think they can turn.
It's where I've gone south many times. You get in a couple ways. One, you think you can fix them.
Yeah.
You think if you talk to someone and you're logical enough that you can fundamentally change them. But the truth is, you're not going to trust them anymore even after you've talked to them. And if they change, they're generally going to change for only a short period of time, and then they're going to roll back to their instinctive direction. But the other reason why you don't let people go, you should, is because you have empathy for them. Mm-hmm. You've been in that position yourself. You might have been worried about a job. You might be thinking you're not performing well enough. And you know that, hey, I have responsibilities.
Yeah.
I'm married. I have 3 kids. Now they're all adults, but still, most of my life, I have responsibilities to a family, right? That person does too.
Yeah.
And you don't want to, I don't want to ruin their life. How can I do that to this person? But the truth is, I've never let anyone go where everybody around them didn't say, what took you so long?
Yeah.
And so you're negatively impacting all of their lives, and while you may be hurting, you are certainly hurting the life of the person you've let go.
Yeah.
But you're helping the life of the person you're bringing in.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a trade-off, and you're helping the lives of everyone around them who was having to carry them because they weren't doing their job right.
Yes.
Now, all of that said,
It's easy to say.
it's easy to say. I can tell you I got burned more than once by knowing I should have let someone go and not having the willpower to pull the trigger.
Yeah.
Because it's really easy to put off until tomorrow what you should do today.
Yeah.
And my most outstanding trait is I am one of the top tier procrastinators you've ever met. I am capable of putting anything off, no matter how important. And that was one of them I would put off. And I would put off, by the time I got around to letting that person go, it was almost crisis time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's unfortunate.
And that's a lesson I keep on saying to Stacy. Don't do as I did. Do as I say.
Yeah.
You have to. If you don't think you can trust that person completely, let them go. Bring in someone you think you can trust, and make sure you can. And then there's plenty of people, by the way, who you can trust now, who change. They're typically what I call, in a larger company, they're typically what I call empire builders. They're people who want to have little fiefdoms inside of the larger operation. And if you want to have a truly collaborative environment, you can't allow that.
Yeah.
And yet people who are there for a long time and develop a lot of responsibility and are successful tend to want to exert more control over their area, and they're not welcoming to input from other people in other areas. What I'll get most often, or what I got most often, because I'm not in that role anymore, is people who would manage the message that would get back to me.
Yeah.
So I would have senior level people who would tell their staff, don't talk to Scott. Nobody says anything to Scott unless it goes through me first. Mm-hmm. But you eventually hear about that stuff. And that's one of the things I talk about you can't trust that person anymore because you're not hearing the truth from them. And that doesn't mean when I say I don't trust them, that doesn't mean they're evil or a bad person.
Sure.
I can't trust them to live with our culture anymore.
Very valuable advice. I think if you were to sum up everything we just talked about over the last several minutes, that is the last 5 minutes of that information can revolutionize a business owner and leader's
Especially if they want to grow.
Yes, if they want to grow. Scott, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. I know, like with everything that we've got going on at this conference and everything else, to kind of take time away from lunch and come hang out with us a little bit is great, because I know a lot of people want a little piece of you.
I don't want to do too much of a mutual admiration society here, but I thank you very much for asking me, Chad. And I'm here because I've grown over the years to admire you and what you've done a lot. And I have a lot of respect for you, and I want to do any little thing I can to help your success, because I think you're a winner. I told someone last week, I said if I was sticking around and I had an opportunity, I'd try and steal Chad. I'd try and pull him in. I think you're a winner, and I like to be associated with winners.
Well, I appreciate it.
So thank you very much for inviting me. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, especially since people don't care about my opinion too much anymore.
Well, I appreciate that, Scott. It's very awesome. For those of you who are watching or listening for the first time, we have got a slew of other episodes available. We're releasing one new one every Tuesday. Many of them, unlike this one today, but many of them are recorded live on Tuesday mornings at 9 a.m. on Facebook, which is when they are released. And we encourage you to subscribe or to follow our Facebook page for all that information. But you can subscribe on any of the podcast platforms, on iTunes, Spotify, Anchor, Stitcher, anything that you can find a podcast on. You can find us by searching for Loc-Doc Security or the Coffee Break Podcast, or you can just visit our website, locdoc.net/podcast. All the information is there. Once again, thank you very much, Scott. Look forward to connecting with you more in the future. And but other than that, we will see you next week right here on the Coffee Break Podcast. To learn more about the topics discussed today and to connect with us online to hear all of the episodes available, visit locdoc.net/podcast.
We got so much to say. We got a podcast to make. We're sipping on lattes, and it's time for a coffee break. It's time for a coffee break. Oh, yeah.
The Coffee Break Podcast is brought to you by Loc-Doc Security. We'd love to connect with you online on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Just search LOCDOCINC.